Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's nice and a little daunting to follow my brilliant friend Megan Bartlett, especially after her nice introduction of me. So thanks for that, Megan, and also thanks, I don't know where she is, but thanks for the work at CHJS. That's amazing and really important work. I am excited to help kick off the next panel, which will deepen the conversation about the role of collective action for systems change. The need for systemic change has been a recurring theme today, and so what I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit and provide some definitions and hopefully a synthesis on the why of collaborative systems and structural work in play equity. So here we go. When we think of inequitable treatment based on race, gender, or ability, we often think of the individual level or interpersonal inequities. A person is treated in an exclusionary or targeted way by another person based on that individual's racist or sexist attitudes or beliefs, for example. But more complex forms of inequities are built not just on those individual attitudes and beliefs, but on institutional policies and practices that produce exclusionary and inequitable results. These could be programs or services or even physical structures that either intentionally or unintentionally don't allow everyone access. When you get a set of institutions joining together, the combined result of all of their exclusionary institutional practices become systemic inequities. So the education system is a great example, or an unfortunate example, I should say, of where this happens. So you have early childhood education, K-12, and higher education, all of which are built on a history of racism and racially exclusionary practices, and the end results are vast racial educational opportunity gaps across the entire system. Lastly, when multiple inequitable systems interact with each other, we get structural inequity. So inequitable access to green space is a good example. So schools own a lot of land, we have municipal parks, and then we have active and passive transportation systems that all intersect in such a way that neighborhoods that are a majority people of color have vastly less access to green space than neighborhoods that are predominantly white. So these structural inequities are what we've been talking about today and what we face in our journey towards play equity. So I just will pause for a second to tell you this is some seriously good graphics for an academic. So it might not be like the world's greatest graphics, but anyway, you'll see what I mean in a moment. So when we look at play equity challenges, what we see above the waterline, right, is differential participation in sport, play, and movement based on race, income, language, gender, ability, zip code, to name a few, all of which we've talked about today. We also see gaps in access to resources, fields, equipment, programs. But then below the waterline, below those visible inequities, are many systems conspiring together to create those exact structural disparities. So I've only listed a few systems here, and I'll walk through those briefly, but they're by way of example and not at all an exhaustive list of the systemic disparities that add up to what we see as play inequity. So the foundation of it all, though, is our economic system, capitalism, where youth sport is a commodity in a $19 billion unregulated free market, generating wealth for some people instead of being provided as a public good for everyone. This means money is always going to be the primary mechanism by which we can access sports, play, and movement. Therefore, we're going to see vast disparities based on socioeconomic status. The criminal legal system contributes in any number of ways. Just one of those being via a legal framework that justifies the over-policing of Black and brown communities, making outdoor play and free play dangerous in many communities. Our healthcare system doesn't invest in preventative care like physical activity, and even further is driven by research and medical training focused predominantly on men. So for example, only 6% of sports medicine research is specifically on women. I already noted a little bit of the land use issues that result in the lack of access to green space. And then lastly, the education system, because it's a primary provider of sports in our US system, it really influences much of what we see above the waterline, including significantly gaps in opportunities for girls, which is still an issue, as we've talked about 50 years after Title IX, or the way that property taxes are used to fund schools, leaving sports in lower income communities underfunded or having to fundraise to bring in partners to provide those opportunities. We also heard some folks talk about that today. So in Washington State, for example, private schools or wealthy public schools win 4 out of every 5 high school state championships across sports. So you can see how these systems add up to create exactly the structure that we have. So the real danger for us in this room is what are we paying attention to, right? So here's where the fancy graphics come in. When we are sailing our ship of youth sports reform to the island of play equity, we're gonna run into those visible disparities. We're going to see kids and groups of kids who lack access. And what we're gonna wanna do is chip away. Thanks for the laughs, I appreciate it. What we're gonna wanna do is chip away at those disparities to provide scholarships, to provide free clinics, camps, equipment, refurbish a few fields. And all of those things are good, and they're important, they absolutely are. And also, no matter how much chipping we do, we're going to run into those submerged inequities, they're still there. And more vitally, by spending all of our time chipping at the surface level, we're actually failing to attend to those root causes. And in that way, we're actually helping to perpetuate and maintain the status quo of structural inequity. Right? I'm gonna give a little bit of an example of that duality from my home state of Washington. So last year, that the MLB All-Star Game was in Seattle, and that came, as it does, with some legacy investment funds. And some of those funds went to a much-needed baseball and softball field refurbishment in South Seattle that will improve play opportunities for many kids there. And that $2 million investment is important. It was also highly visible, and it was used as a photo op and a feel-good story for the MLB, the Mariners, and many, many elected officials. So simultaneously, last year, the MLB told our state legislature that minor league baseball stadiums in our state needed to be upgraded. So our state legislature went looking for money to do those upgrades. And what they found was a $45 million pot of money that had been voter approved and statutorily dedicated towards investment in youth athletic fields in communities in need across our state. So with no fanfare, no visibility, hidden in 300 pages of state budget, the legislature took $32 million out of that fund and redirected it to minor league baseball stadium upgrades. So while we were distracted above the waterline with a $2 million feel-good story, we lost $32 million that would have changed the face of play access across the state, right? And these are the kind of things that are happening all the time. So what's the solution? Well, the panel's gonna talk about those solutions, but the main solution is to see it all, to attend to all of it, right? To raise these systemic issues above the waterline, we have to talk about them, which is exactly what we're doing here today. So we have to bring people together from all the sectors, and many people have talked about this today, and we have to tell the truth about the ways that they are participating in producing and maintaining play inequity. We have to, together, explicitly name capitalism, racism, ableism, sexism, all the isms that Dr. Whitley talked about earlier today that have shaped our current youth sports landscape. Then, as David Flynn and Dr. Young reminded us, Only led by the folks experiencing marginalization and harm can we problem solve together. So we're never going to get to that island of play equity without fully attending to everything below the waterline. The only way out of this is through this hard stuff, and therefore what stands in the way must become the way. Thank you.